They love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, a parliamentary researcher has been arrested, apparently, for being a spy for China. There's some concern that this is the first, yes, but by no means the last. I'm asking, do you think we need to designate China a threat to the UK? And BMW have now confirmed that production of their new electric cars will happen in the UK. Great news, but I can't help but notice the UK government surely has been handing over money, hand over fist, to help them make that decision. How much do you think us taxpayers should be subsidising private profit-making businesses? And speaking of business, I want to ask about workforces. These new anti-strike laws, are they anti-democratic? That is what they've been called. And the cost of rent is on the rise. It's now been called loudly that we need to introduce rent caps in this country. Do we? We've got it all to come and more. But before we get into it, let's grab tonight's latest headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Michelle, thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has told the House of Commons the sanctity of Westminster must be protected following Chinese spy allegations. It comes after an unnamed parliamentary researcher who was arrested in March issued a statement saying he is completely innocent. Rishi Sunak, who's been facing calls to designate China as a national security threat, told MPs such actions will not be tolerated.
The whole House is rightly appalled about reports of espionage in this building. The sanctity of this place must be protected, and the right of members to speak their minds without fear or sanction must be maintained. We will defend our democracy and our security. So I was emphatic with Premier Lee that actions which seek to undermine British democracy are completely unacceptable and will never be tolerated.
The Deputy Prime Minister says China represents a systemic challenge to the UK.
It remains an absolute priority for the government to take all necessary steps to protect the United Kingdom from any foreign state activity which seeks to undermine our national security, prosperity and democratic values. The government has been clear that China represents a systemic challenge to the United Kingdom and to our values.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has called on the Prime Minister to reveal what he knew and when.
China is a strategic challenge, that's for sure, and what we need is a policy that is clear and is settled. Now, we haven't had that for the last 10 years. We've had division and inconsistency from this government. But I think this morning, there's a very big question now for the Prime Minister, which is, was this raised when these arrests took place back in March, or has it only been raised now that it's come into the public domain? I think that's the central question that needs to be answered by the Prime Minister today.
In other news, GB News sources have confirmed terror suspect Daniel Khalif has been taken to Belmarsh High Security Prison. The 21-year-old appeared in court today, charged after escaping from Wandsworth Prison last week. He was arrested on Saturday after a 4-day manhunt. Westminster Magistrates Court was told the former soldier allegedly escaped by strapping himself to a food delivery vehicle using material which may have been bedsheets. Khalif disappeared while awaiting trial after being charged with terror offences in January. The Home Secretary is pushing to ban American Bully XL dogs, arguing they're a clear and lethal danger, particularly to children. A warning: we're about to show you video of a man being chased and attacked by a dog, which some viewers may find distressing. Suella Braverman says that she's commissioned urgent advice following attacks over the weekend. Video was recorded of a number of people being chased by an American Bully XL in Birmingham. An 11-year-old girl was also injured after being attacked in the city on Saturday.
So I ran across the road, there's a little girl on the floor, and her arm was all bit and everything, all down on one side of her face and everything. And also, this dog was biting people.
And then he ran over to the petrol station.
So I ran over here. I checked on one bloke, because obviously he got bit as well. He was filling up his car, like usual. Diesel, this, that. He dropped on the floor, dragged him out the car, dropped on the floor, bit him, took chunks out of all of his body.
There's an eyewitness describing the scene there. The number of people killed during the earthquake in Morocco has climbed to almost 2,500. But it's feared that figure will continue to rise. British search and rescue teams have been deployed to help with rescue efforts, with 60 specialists, search dogs and equipment sent to the country. Nearly 2,500 people were also injured when the 6.8 magnitude quake hit on Friday. UK authorities have told GB News they're currently pursuing around 800 live terror investigations. It's understood the majority relate to lone individuals, but there are also more organised plots and threats from state actors. It comes 22 years after the 9/11 terror attack, in which more than 2,750 people were killed. Pubs in England and Wales can continue selling takeaway pints as relaxed licensing rules have been extended. The rules were brought in to help pubs during COVID lockdowns. Pubs can keep on selling their pints until March 2025. They were meant to end this month after having been extended twice. Policing Minister Chris Philp says it's vital that we do everything we can to support British pubs. And some breaking news in the last few minutes. Administrators have said a further 9,100 Wilko employees will be made redundant by early October. It comes after a last-ditch bailout by HMV failed. The company had been in discussions to buy around 200 stores. The first 24 outlets are now scheduled to shut their doors tomorrow. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio, and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Michelle.
Thanks for that, Tatiana. I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Richard, you're my first email of the day. You're saying, why are you standing in that position at the opening of your show? You look like you're doing a photo shoot for Homes and Gardens magazine. I can confirm that I'm not auditioning for any magazine, quite frankly, just mixing it up a little bit, keeping you all on your toes. Anyway, I'm with you until 7 o'clock tonight. The CEO of First Property Group and the former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib alongside me, as is the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Snyder. Good evening to both of you gents. You know the drill as well, don't you? Get in touch with me about whatever is on your mind tonight, quite frankly, but keep it clean, please. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you get hold of me. Or you can tweet me at GBNews. Now, top stories of the night, of course, is China. But before I want to get on to that, I'm just looking back on those headlines there, listening intently to Tatiana, and that dog attack, the footage that you've just seen then, I watched it in full, that footage, and it sent chills literally to my spine. Absolutely horrific. And I've been thinking about it ever since. I went on Twitter. Suella, of course, is saying that she's exploring whether or not these type of dogs should be banned, whether it's possible to ban them at all, because I think, as I understand it, they're not like just a simple breed, basically. I was saying, Ben Habib, that I do think these kind of dogs should be banned. And I would go a step further, and I upset a lot of people, actually, and this is an open country, feel free to debate me. But then I think to myself, if you ban new dogs of this type, what do you do with it?
Dogs.
Yeah, what do you do with all the existing ones?
Yeah, well, I think it is different banning the breeding of a particular animal and actually culling those.
Well, yeah, because that's what I was suggesting. What I was saying is I would round them up and put the existing ones to sleep. And a lot of people were very upset with me. A lot of people have similar dogs to this. They say, Michelle, you don't know what you're talking about. These dogs are family-friendly pets and all the rest of it. I just worry that these things now, they are being bred specifically.
Yeah. I mean, the breeding of them is unforgivable. I think that has to stop. That should be banned. They've clearly got violent tendencies. But I think culling them is difficult. And you know, owners will rightly say that, in fact, their dog isn't violent. It just happens, that some of them are, that their dog's been perfect, it's got a
Well, all dogs
record.
are non-violent until they are. And I guess what I'm trying to do is look at how do you protect children and innocent people in this country. Anyway, James, desperate to know what you think, but for time reasons, I have been told twice now I do need to move on. So you'll have to tell me your thoughts about dangerous dogs another day. Let me know your thoughts. I know many of you are dog lovers. You absolutely love dogs. I know that the sentiment out there as well is very far and wide that it's not the dog. It is the owner. But are there any exceptions to that? If you're breeding, you're deliberately mixing dogs, fighting dogs, is that an exception? I don't know. You get in touch and you tell me your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.com. But I do need to move on because quite serious matters. News over the weekend. A parliamentary researcher was arrested on suspicion of spying for China. I've got to say, though, there's concerns and worries that this might not be the last we see of that. Some security intelligence people think that actually Westminster has been, I quote, infiltrated by a number of operatives. It's got me thinking tonight. Do you think we need to designate China as a threat to society? And if we do, what would that actually look like? And what would that mean? I think I've got a guest. I was just about to turn to you, Ben Habib. Oh, no, I don't. I thought I had a guest waiting patiently for me, but I do not. But imminently, I shall be joined by an intelligence historian because I'm fascinated to get his view, but I'm also fascinated as to yours, Ben Habib.
So we've got to go back 20 years, I think, to understand the mistakes we've made with China. The principle under Blair's government, adopted by Osborne, was that if we engage with China, if we trade with China, if we inculcate Western capitalist ways of trading and living, they will eventually politically and ideologically come over to our way of thinking. And that was a fundamental mistake, the idea that by exporting capitalism, trading with them, we would ideologically get them to believe in democracy, the upholding of the law and everything else that we do. What China did was to completely take advantage of our generosity and preparedness to trade with them. They exploited it to the nth degree. They've done it incredibly well. They've used their security services, their intelligence services, their political establishment, together with private enterprise. They don't have private enterprise, but with enterprise manufacturing, in order to occupy pretty much, the Belt and Roads plan, pretty much all the areas of the world which create the resources that they want. They have become the new modern imperial power. And we, the UK, encouraged it. We trade with them. We're so embedded with them now that you get the kind of timid response that we saw from Rishi Sunak, saying that he told Li Qiang that we will not tolerate an assault on British democracy. But actually, even 20 years ago, we would have expelled all Chinese diplomats as a result of what's just happened in Westminster. It is a systemic
But
threat.
I've got to say, obviously, the guy's denying it. The Chinese embassy in London, they're massively, strongly denying it. And I have to say, I'll just quote them, actually, before I bring you in, James. They're saying, this is the Chinese embassy in London, they're saying, basically, this is all nothing but malicious slander. They urge relevant parties in the UK to stop their anti-China political manipulation and stop putting on such a self-staged political farce. What do you make to it all?
So I agree with Ben that Parliament and Rishi Sunak and their debate and so on was pompous and phony and is not really about the real things. But, I mean, yes, I'm sure, of course China has spies in Britain. We have spies in China. The US has spies in Britain.
How do you know?
Well, I couldn't reveal my extremely extremely high-level intelligence sources, but you know, you would probably be a bit alarmed if we didn't have any spies in China. We have spies. Well, I don't know, but anyway, the point is, countries have spies in other people's countries. That's not good, but that is, you know, that is the case. And when we're talking about, you know, Ben was saying, and I can, you know, here we have to disagree, part company, I'm afraid. About, you know, China is this new imperial force, etc. China has one military base outside of China. The US has 800. China doesn't have any troops in our country. The US does. It's got 10,000. I mean, I'm not saying that therefore we should not have relations with the US. That would be ridiculous. And in the same way, of course, we're going to have relations with China.
Well, let me bring a third chap into this conversation, because joining me down the line now is Rupert Allison, an intelligence historian. Good evening to you. We've just been hearing in the news bulletin that Oliver Dowden, he's described in Parliament today China as being, I quote, a systemic challenge to the UK. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and long term, that's a reasonable assessment. But I think on the evidence that we have before us today, we can only say that what the Chinese have been indulging in, particularly the Ministry of State Security, is the kind of reconnaissance operations that is characteristic of them undertaking this kind of activity prior to a major espionage organization and network and penetration, and probably accompanied by an influence operation as well. All of that is very well documented in the United States.
So what do you think we should do about it now? Because there's talk about whether or not we should officially designate China a threat. What would that mean? Is there any benefit in that?
No. This is getting tied up in really bureaucracy and legislation. And so the new National Security Act offers this route, which is an alternative to the Official Secrets Act, an alternative to counterterrorism legislation. And it's very binary and focused, and it is not really appropriate for what we're experiencing today. What should happen is vigilance, and we should be very tough in identifying people who may or may not have been recruited for espionage themselves, or they may not realize that they have been cultivated for that purpose. And if you take an innocent soul who perhaps is a researcher in the House of Commons, it may well be that just the information they pick up in the strangers' bar, in the committee rooms, that may be of some value to the Ministry of State Security in the future, particularly when they're looking for weaknesses amongst members of Parliament who, God forbid, may express some weakness that could be exploited by an adversary.
And there's been criticism as well about James Cleverly, for example, going over to Beijing. Some people are saying we shouldn't have friendly ties to China. The flip side of that is other people are saying we need to have more friendly ties. We need to be closer to China because of their power. What say you?
Well, I think embrace them, but keep them close and keep your friends closer still.
Close, but your friends closer still. Rupert Allison there, thank you for your insights. Do you agree with that final sentiment?
Well, I don't entirely agree with him. I mean, I think the reason we've got the problems we've got with China is because, as I mentioned earlier, we were too quick to embrace them. We wanted to bring them onto the world stage, and we thought we would neuter any threat to our security as a result of trading with them. And that is a fundamentally flawed principle. And what we've now got is an economic arrangement with China, which would be incredibly painful for us to break. We would make the inflation that we've had so far look like a walk in the park if we tried to really break ties with China. We would also find a very hostile China on the other side of the Rubicon, if you like. And we've got this really difficult problem. To say it's a systemic challenge is to totally underestimate the problem that China now poses to the United Kingdom. And if you think they've got people in Westminster, Michelle, they've got people in our education establishments, they've got people everywhere. They are setting the debate. Sorry, forgive me.
I know you sound like you're about to lose your voice. You want me to bring in James? You can have a gulp of whatever that. What is that in your cup?
It's ginger something or the other.
With the tea bag left in?
Yeah.
You need honey. I think you need some honey in there. That's what we need. I'll try and rustle up some honey in the break for you. But yeah, the language, I found the language quite interesting because Sunak, before he became PM, he did used to talk quite tough about China. Liz Truss, she used to talk quite tough about them. And then I feel a little bit that now that you've got your likes of Sunak into the position of power, talk seems to kind of be diluted. Words are kind of quite loose, quite kind of wishy-washy. Where did that sentiment go that Sunak held previously?
I mean, it's easy to say empty, nonsense, saber-rattling piffle, which is what Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak and lots of other so-called China hawks are very, very tough. There's no action to take. Our relations with China should be based on mutual respect. Does that mean that should we allow them to have spies in our country? No, but should we completely flip out and say this is a terrible threat and we're under enormous danger because of it? No, not at all. I think everybody should calm down and use less over-the-top language, which, as Ben was explaining why, can't actually be linked to any actions.
Well, there you go. Mutual respect is what James thinks we need. I think, actually, if I was in charge, which heaven forbid, for all of you, I always say, thank goodness I'm not, I would be doing deep investigations to see whether or not I could try and get some kind of reparations when it came to COVID from China. Never mind some of the other stuff that we're talking about. Anyway, give me your thoughts on all of that, GBviews at gbnews.com when I come back. Great news if you are employed by BMW, because indeed 2 of their new electronic cars will be produced in the UK. But to what cost? The government, of course, helping subsidise that business. Is that the job of us taxpayers to help private profit-making enterprises? You tell me.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
There, Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me remain Ben Habib and James Schneider. I went off topic at the start of my programme. I was talking to you about these dangerous dogs. Frank has been in touch. You said, I messaged you a while ago, Michelle, but you didn't read my email out. Well, tonight it's your lucky night, Frank. What you're saying is that it's your belief that every single dog should be muzzled. You're asking how many more children or adults have to be ripped to pieces before the government takes action. I don't know, all dogs muzzled in any public place? Is that a bit extreme? I don't know. What about those ones that look like teddies? What are they, like cockapoos or whatever they're called? I don't know. Really? Those little teddy bears with a muzzle? I don't know. You guys get in touch and let me know your thoughts on that. Della is saying that UK governments have sleepwalked into Chinese control by becoming too reliant on import from them. She says it's time to source goods anywhere, elsewhere, particularly by investing in manufacturing here in this country. That's a nice segue you give me there, because the UK automotive industry is having a mini boom because BMW is now set to make electric minis at its plant in Oxford. I've got to say, this has been kind of up and down for a little while now, whether or not they would stay here, whether or not they would do a lot of their engineering, whether it was in China, Germany or wherever. But it's good news, I have to say. This is over a couple of different plants. I think about 4,000 jobs, Ben Habib, look likely to be secured as a result of this. Talk and focus now has gone to the UK government in terms of subsidies and support, how much of us taxpayers have to support BMW. They're quite tight-lipped about this, but figures of about 75 million have been bandied around. Should UK taxpayers be, I would almost say, like subsidising, bailing out, whatever you want to call it, incentivising private enterprise like this?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's not unusual for governments to woo large investments coming into their country. That's not unusual. And what is interesting here, slight digression.
When you say woo, what do you mean?
Well,
Hand
by
over
giving,
cash?
I mean, typically you would give tax breaks. So you'd give tax breaks on employment costs of people in the vicinity. So if, I think that they're forecast to employ 4,000 people. What you might do in a special enterprise zone is allow employers in that zone, and that BMW could have been located in that zone, and not to pay national insurance. Employers' national insurance, for example, on employees in that zone, or to give them other tax breaks. That's how I would prefer to see it. Actually, what I'd really prefer to see is tax breaks for enterprise right across the United Kingdom. What this evidence is, and what I've been saying for many, many months, as you'll know, Michelle, is that taxes on business are too high at the moment. And we're not going to attract international business into the United Kingdom unless we give them a competitive tax base from which to make their products and sell them. We saw AstraZeneca choosing the Republic of Ireland over Liverpool for its new research facility, and it cited the 12.5% corporation tax rate in the Republic versus our 25% corporation tax rate in the UK. It's obvious that business will flow to those countries that provide it with a competitive edge. But there's just one other quick thing I want to say. BMW has been lobbying the EU not to impose taxes on British components and cars for fear of that putting the cost up too much for electric vehicles and allowing China to take the market.
Yeah, this is about an agreement, isn't it, in electric cars, based on a percentage of the components need to be locally sourced. If you're not, I think it's a 10% tariff or something like that that gets applied. What do you make to it all, James?
So I think in general terms, where there's public money, there should be some public return. So we should be viewed more as an investor in a particular large project rather than just giving away grants, and we can help incentivise it in those sorts of ways. But the larger thing here, and this does relate back to the conversation we were having with China before, is the US, China, and to a lesser extent the EU are setting up competing supply chains for all of the new clean tech things that we're going to need, all of that infrastructure, as well as all of the critical minerals that we're going to need for high-tech computing. And the Biden administration has done this with what they're calling friendshoring and nearshoring, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and they are offering huge subsidies to businesses to do things that they want them to do. China has a state-directed model, but that is doing similar things. It brings it under its control the types of industries that it wants. And Europe is trying to do a version of that, just with less fiscal firepower than the US has. So if Britain wants to compete for these things, we have to find these kinds of handouts. But the problem here is that Britain doesn't actually have a geoeconomic strategy to fit into. Like, the US has its plan, the EU sort of has a plan, China has its plan for how we're going to have, you know, what are we going to have for our high-tech supply chains? How are we going to have access to our the minerals that we need for these gigafactories?
China's very successfully pretty much cornered the market for a lot of those minerals. You know, they have placed themselves in the countries that produce these minerals, and that's why Taiwan is, you know, such geopolitical.
And I've got to say, I think there's a lot of controversy around some of the labour and how they are extracting some of these components and minerals or whatever it is. Baz, one of my viewers, has been in touch and said, Michelle, the government should have said no to BMW, no to any subsidies whatsoever. And he says, but what they should have said is, we will not subsidise you creating in the UK, but we'll slap a 20% subsidy on any cars that you want to import into the UK. Would that be a good idea or not?
Well, I've always said that we should be, you know, the opportunity for Brexit, and we can have a nice debate here, the opportunity for Brexit was to put right that massive trade imbalance that effectively the United Kingdom has with Germany, where, you know, we run a trade deficit with the European Union of about £100 billion a year, which is very bad for sterling. And what we should have been doing is using our Brexit freedoms to deregulate, cut taxes here, and actually impose tariffs on German-made manufactured cars. Absolutely. And balance that imbalance.
Well, there you go. Baz, has that answered your question? James has probably got a response to that. But before he does so, let's just take a little look, shall we, at the weather in the UK.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening to you. A band of rain is going to continue to push southwards through the next 24 hours with some showers both to the north and south of this, whilst in the southeast we're holding on to that humid air because here we are still ahead of these fronts, which have something a little bit cooler, a bit more comfortable following in behind. Also on the fronts there'll be a fair bit of rain, so a cloudy, wet end to the day across many northern parts of England into Wales and southwest England too. In the southeast we're holding on to those humid conditions and we could see a few showers developing. Also some showers in the far north of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Cooler here, whilst in the southeast with that high humidity, temperatures not dropping a huge amount. As we look through Tuesday, a damp, wet start across many parts of England and Wales, though in the southeast a good deal of brightness. Though with the high humidity, I am expecting a few showers to kick off here, and they could be heavy, perhaps even thundery, whilst a brighter picture across the bulk of Scotland and Northern Ireland, a scattering of showers and a little bit of cloud at times too. A bit cooler than it has been through some recent days, getting to highs of around 24, perhaps 25 Celsius in the southeast. Wednesday morning may get off to a bit of a chilly start. Couldn't rule out a touch of frost across some parts of Scotland, but otherwise a generally fine day for most until some wet and windy weather pushes in from the northwest as we go into the afternoon. That rain's then going to sweep further southwards later in the week, and temperatures are going to be much closer to average for the time of year than they were last week.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
There you go. What was you responding very briefly to Ben on his Brexit piece before I go off?
Well, I was enjoying the fact that Ben's basically an import substitution industrialisation person. That's what he's putting forward, which is a perfectly good strategy that was many countries did in the 60s and 70s, and then they got stopped from doing it by the kind of neoliberal tax-cutting, deregulation, privatisation regimes that Ben presumably supports. But if you are going to do those kinds of things with your Brexit freedoms, you need to then have the other side, which is bringing the supply chains here and investing in industries, which is going to require state involvement.
You see, Germany is the biggest beneficiary of EU largesse.
Yes.
Germany has an artificially weak currency because of the euro, and it uses that effectively to dump products on the United Kingdom.
I agree.
And I'm not talking about ending free trade. I'm talking about pushing it back against that completely non-level playing field.
Well, there you go. My directors have been issuing a not very subtle hint, playing the break music for the last probably 2 minutes there. So I'm going to take the hint and go to a break. When I come back, I'll have some of your responses, but I also want to ask you, what about your rent? Do you rent? Are you a landlord? How much has your rent gone up by? And do you think it's time to introduce rent controls in this country? See you in 2.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Ben Habib and James Schneider remain alongside me. No expense spared here at GB News because you've got not one but two drinks now to help soothe your throat.
Just thank the production staff. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, you're very polite, Ben Habib, aren't you? That's what my mum likes about you. One of the things she says, that you're a very polite young man. Right, Steve says, Michelle, you're talking about BMW. You say, I know subsidies might sting a little, but this is Steve's analogy. It's like going in and buying £2 million for £1 million, because when you take into account new jobs and better prospects for the area, there you go, it makes sense. He says, you've got to play the long game, Michelle, you've got to play the long game. Della, though, she's having none of it. She says, this subsidy is basically just another green stealth tax on UK taxpayers. Michael agrees with James, says, if we're giving 75 million quid or there or thereabouts to BMW, why don't we get 75 million quid's worth of shares in the business? I don't know, you tell me. Graham says, the real question here, Michelle, is how much extra tax will this plant bring in for the government? Surely it will be way more than 75 million. Got to say, if you don't support these enterprises, you are indeed, to one of my viewers' points then, you're just going to be helping support the workforce when they eventually end up on the dole, aren't you? Keep your thoughts coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. Speaking of workforces, though, the Trade Union Congress, the TUC, have complained, basically, saying that we're all familiar now with these new strike laws, and what they're being called now is anti-democratic. Do you agree with that, these strike laws?
Yeah, they absolutely are anti-democratic because they breach the basic freedom of association. So people at work should be able to get together with other people at work and take action on that basis. And it's not just about the particular workers that these laws make it harder for them to take action, harder for them to go on strike, and therefore harder for them to improve their pay and working conditions. It impacts all of us because since we have had lots of anti-trade union laws come in, wages have stopped rising in line with productivity, and we have wages now at the same level they were in 2005. So if we want to have a higher wage, more sustainable economy, we need trade unions that can negotiate on behalf of workers, and they can put a floor underneath wages and conditions for workers, whether they are in a union or not in a union.
Ben?
So before we discuss the actual specific act about which they're complaining, it by definition cannot be undemocratic for Parliament to do something, to pass a law. That is our sovereign Parliament. It's our
the definition of democracy.
It's the definition of democracy. And what I find quite startling in a way is that, in fact, what the TUC is appealing to is international law. And it's the UN, is it called the International Labour Organization or something, which they've appealed.
The ILO.
And we see so much of this now, Michelle. We see so much of sovereign authority that should be vested in Parliament being handed over under international law or to international supranational institutions or indeed domestic independent bodies, which basically is fundamentally undemocratic. And that has to stop. Parliament must be supreme. So having debugged that one, I think the law about which they're objecting is that there should be a minimum service level in the event of a strike. It seems to me we haven't got a minimum service level from the public sector, even when they're fully in work. And I don't know whether that means that would prohibit striking or not, but I think it's reasonable that certainly in fundamentally important areas of the economy, the NHS, for example, teaching perhaps, there should be a minimum level of service provided so that the country can move forward without being brought to a complete halt.
And don't you think that's fair? Because you talk about people should be able to, operate as a collective and get higher wages and all the rest of it, which is fair enough from the Labour's perspective. But what about from the customer's perspective? Because surely those customers are entitled to the service that often people are paying for. So surely when you think about things like the minimum service levels, the right of an organisation to employ agency staff and all the rest of it, that's just protecting the consumer side.
It's helping everybody, or it's helping everybody who works for a living or has a relative who works for a living, for workers to have the right to organise, to bid up the wages and conditions. That is also in the long-term interest.
But no one's trying to take that away. What they're trying to do is say, whilst you're doing that, the service continues.
Well, which undermines the purpose of a strike. The point of a strike is to prevent the employer from being able to carry on ordinary activities because the workers aren't there. The workers do the work. You withdraw the labour, showing that you need to value the labour.
Yeah, no, a strike works, but it's not all. You can't have everything just in the favour of the workers. There's got to be a balance for the customers.
So let's take healthcare where this impacts. So we can clap nurses during the pandemic, yet their real pay is much lower than it was in 2010. They will be prevented from being able to take the kind of strike action. They are already. Hold on. Already, there are far too few nurses. There aren't safe staffing levels. Those are the things which the nurses in their industrial dispute are talking about. They're saying we want to be able to care for our patients properly, which means we need to have proper shifts and safe staffing levels. The idea.
Yes, but what about the flip side?
The idea.
No, we get what you're saying.
Hold on, but it's
what about the flip side? What about my mum and sister?
The interests of the patient and the interests of the nurse or the doctor are aligned. They are misaligned with the government that is underfunding, not doing enough for training for nurses, not doing enough for hiring for nurses, not doing enough pay for nurses, and so on and so forth. It is the same thing in schools and education and so on and so forth. Because, you know, what have we had now for nearly 2 decades is people's pay being held at the level or held down while everything else is getting more expensive.
But then the flip side of that will be, and by the way, everyone watching this show is perhaps familiar with the fact my mum and sister are both NHS nurses, so I absolutely concur. I want them to be paid fairly and work in safe environments and all the rest of it. But the flip side to that will be there is also people pay their taxes. You don't get a break from paying taxes because your service is not available to you because a collection of people want a pay rise. So as customers, patients, service users, whatever we call it, you have to balance the need of both sides. Surely, I don't know, you get in touch, I'll give you the final word at home. GBViews at gbnews.com is how you get hold of me. I want to talk to you about those rent controls after the break. Do you think it's time to bring them in this country or not?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
all sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you until 7 o'clock tonight, alongside me the CEO of First Property Group and a former Brexit Party MEP, Ben Habib, and a former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Glenn says, you are too young to remember the good old days when you went in to see your boss and tell him that you were striking the following day if he didn't give you a pay rise. His answer was always, no problem, you go on strike tomorrow, that's absolutely fine, get your desk cleared by 5 o'clock. He says, them for the days. Dan says, anyone who's on over 40 grand a year and strikes should be sacked. Get them out into the real world. John, what's the UN got to do with this? Nothing, end of. Ted says, if people can form a union and strike, then employers should be able to band together and action a lockout. Freedom works both ways. I suspect there is some sympathy for the strikers out there, though, so I'll try and pull some of those through before the end of the programme. But I want to talk to you about rent. Hamptons now, who you might be familiar with, a massive estate agent, that is projecting that rents are set to rise by, get this, almost 5 times more than house prices between now and 2026. Apparently, there's a lack of housing supply and landlords are passing on their increase in cost to tenants. Already, before I've even commenced my debate, you guys are getting in touch. Lots of you are getting in touch and defending landlords. Zoe says, landlords are now left in an impossible situation. I dread to think what the next government will do. The outcome is going to be more homeless people living in tents. Paul says, I'm a landlord of 4 houses. Stop bashing us. We are not immune to the cost of living crisis, interest rate rises and inflation. We've got to put up, and now this is interesting. He says, we have to put up rental income because that is our wages. Phil says, I invested in property instead of a pension. Many people have that sentiment. Ben Habib, you own a property company, so give me your thoughts on this.
Well, I thought Zoe and the gentleman after her spoke unadulterated sense. I mean, what you've got in the private rented sector at the moment is interest costs on your borrowings going up if you've got a mortgage on your property. You've got cost of fuel gone up dramatically. You've got cost of labour gone up dramatically for maintaining your property. Council tax has gone up. All these costs have gone up. And what happens when costs go up in a property is the value drops. So not only have costs gone up in property, the values of the properties that landlords own have gone down, and you've got to pass those costs onto those who are renting.
Right, hang on, because can I just pull up those one at a time? So interest rate rises, that's only relevant when your term is coming to renewal on your interest. So yes, they go up every month, but unless you're on an open tracker mortgage, you're going to be protected by that.
Only for a while. I mean, the underlying...
Your council tax, your tenants normally pick that up. Your fuel costs, I mean, I don't really know what's that got to do with renting out a house to someone. You're not driving around all the time doing repairs.
No, but you've got central heating in the common parts, and you've got...
Oh, what, a hallway?
Well, service charges can be a significant part of the cost of maintaining a block of flats.
I'm playing devil's advocate with you, by the way, because I can see 2 sides to this argument. But, James, let me bring you in.
And taxes have gone up, too, on property, dramatically.
What taxes?
Stamp duty.
Yeah, but you're only buying your property once. Once you've got your property, why is that responsible for...
And then the inability to offset costs against income before you pay corporation tax, before you pay personal tax.
True, that is a big one. James?
Of course, rents should be capped. They're far too high. Tenants pay in the region, or it will be by the end of this projection, in the region of £65 billion per year to landlords. Yes, of course, landlords have costs. Partly they're paying interest on buy-to-let mortgages, which tenants are paying the mortgages. Tenants are paying the mortgages so that the owner of the property can realise the capital value increase, i.e., when the value goes up.
They're all
the value goes up.
Now,
the answer to this would be to dramatically increase the building of homes for social rent at the same time as capping rent rises so they don't go up at all, so that in real terms they fall, so interest eats away at them.
Right, why is a landlord going to operate at a loss?
But
why are they going to provide a house at a loss?
That's the point. You're presuming that right now landlords are on the edge, and that
A lot of them are, yeah.
And it's been, but for all of the, I mean, hold on.
A lot of properties just lost their face.
You just showed a graphic.
Let's get it back up, everybody.
Show the graphic.
Get it
right?
back up.
We had the graphic, and it shows what the monthly rent was, I think, in 2013 at one side of it. I'm hoping it's going to come up now. No? OK. And
any moment. There it is.
Any
there.
moment. Right,
Look at that, everyone.
Right, 2013, 10 years ago, right? It's, what's that? About £800 a month, right? It's now over £1,250. It's projected to go up to £1,400. Now, what is the point on this graph where what a landlord's monthly costs are on average? They are not approaching that level. There is a large amount of profit which is built in. So, could there be some things that could be...
That's a throwaway line.
No, but it's also...
James,
it happens to be throwaway, but it is also true.
You're wrong.
Now, we might agree on interest rates. I don't think the Bank of England should be raising interest rates as it is. That would have other knock-on effects. But there are... we should be stopping... the increasing of rents. They're going to go up 25% over the next 4 years. 25%. Rents need to be held down, and the government needs to build social housing. And I'll tell you a way in which they can do that. Private rented tenants, their deposits are £4 billion. They're just sitting there, not doing anything. The government should take that money to capitalise a housing policy bank which builds social housing.
So you want government to gamble with people's
deposits?
No,
I want the government to build homes for social rent. That's what I want the government. That's what I
take possession of cash which doesn't belong to the government, which is sitting
which
on
is
deposit
ring-fenced, by the way, in a tenancy deposit scheme.
Which is ring-fenced in a tenancy deposit scheme. Use that money to capitalise a bank at some rate of capitalisation so that it is not risky, and use that money to build social housing, to bring down the cost of housing, because it is insanely high.
Let me just ask you a really quick question, because it's almost out of time. Do you think any landlords providing a good service?
I don't know. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the cost of housing.
No, but the concept that there is a private rental sector, is there a part of you that looks on that and goes, actually, that is a needed and welcome part of our economy?
I would rather that homes were cheaper and that they were at social rent.
So you would rather see a lot of people plunge into negative equity if you've recently bought a property?
No, I would use. Firstly, it's not that many people, and I would use a housing. I would use a housing policy bank to bail out people so that we can overall reduce the cost of housing. That's also for mortgages. I think we want to reduce the cost of housing overall.
You want to bring property prices down. So I'm saying to you,
I won't do it by capping rents. What will happen is there'll be less property developed because it's not profitable to develop it.
Well, I've just set up a bank. I've just set up a bank which is going to build more social homes.
We've tried capping rents.
What do you mean with other people's money?
It's
money that is currently sitting. It's money that's currently sitting in a bank.
Ring fence.
You get it out at the end of your deposit, and a new deposit comes in. This is not socialism comment. This is extremely sensible. It will reduce the cost of housing for most people. The only people that wouldn't like it are people who will only make their money from other people paying their mortgages.
Blimey, I tell you what, I could keep this one going all night long, but look, the time flies, doesn't it? Get in touch. If you're a landlord, do you feel that is a dirty word? I've got to say, it feels it, doesn't it? But is that right? I would say no. Look, time's gone. Thank you, James, Ben. Farage next. Don't go anywhere.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening to you. A band of rain is going to continue to push southwards through the next 24 hours with some showers both to the north and south of this, whilst in the southeast we're holding on to that humid air because here we are still ahead of these fronts which have something a little bit cooler, a bit more comfortable following in behind. Also on the fronts there'll be a fair bit of rain, so a cloudy, wet end to the day across many northern parts of England into Wales and southwest England too. In the southeast we're holding on to those humid conditions and we could see a few showers developing. Also some showers in the far north of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Cooler here, whilst in the southeast with that high humidity, temperatures not dropping a huge amount. As we look through Tuesday, a damp, wet start across many parts of England and Wales, though in the southeast a good deal of brightness. Though with the high humidity, I am expecting a few showers to kick off here, and they could be heavy, perhaps even thundery, whilst a brighter picture across the bulk of Scotland and Northern Ireland, a scattering of showers and a little bit of cloud at times too. A bit cooler than it has been through some recent days, getting to highs of around 24, perhaps 25 Celsius in the southeast. Wednesday morning may get off to a bit of a chilly start, couldn't rule out a touch of frost across some parts of Scotland, but otherwise a generally fine day for most until some wet and windy weather pushes in from the northwest as we go into the afternoon. That rain's then going to sweep further southwards later in the week, and temperatures are going to be much closer to average for the time of year than they were last week.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's